Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar with American West Metals. I'm Danica Warburton, the Investor Relations Representative for American West, and I'm joined today by the Managing Director, Dave O'Neill. Dave is going to provide an update on the company and also mineral resource estimate announced for Storm yesterday.
Thanks, Danica, and welcome everybody. Look, end of the year, it's been a big year for us. I'll probably move through the presentation fairly quickly and just touch some of the highlights and some of the, what I think the achievements this year have been, and also what a bit of a snapshot on the future as well. So it's been a big, I guess, back end of the season for us as we prepare this. There's lots going on in the background here as well. So little snapshot here of the chalcocite, and this is from the Cyclone deposit. This is one of the metallurgical drill holes that we drilled. You can see some very nice to dark charcoal grey coloured chalcocite, and that gives it a look of, generally that's what the bulk of the ore body looks like. You can see it's very coarse mineralisation, and therefore that's amenable to crushing and obviously sorting, which we'll talk to later. Again, this is lots of arm waving and technical information in this presentation. So that's the disclaimer on that. Now, look, this is, again, I'll move through this really quickly because we have touched on this and everyone's fairly aware of what we have. But it's important to know that we are 3 projects. There have been some questions on West Desert, so I will talk to those. Utah, particularly with the new Trump administration coming in, is well positioned to, for development and also supporting the resources there. We have some good relationships formed in that state, and there's certainly a lot of interest externally from third parties, but also within the government to progress both Copper Warrior and West Desert. So I'll talk to that in a bit more detail. And obviously Canada's been a fantastic place to work as well for a lot of Aussie explorers. Another photo of the Storm copper mineralisation. That particular one is bornite and chalcopyrite, which are, the lesser part of the ore body, but this is a very nice looking photo, so that's why I put that in. Look, so this year there was a lot of achievements from the logistical side, and we did spend a lot of money this year, as people would know, but there's some good reasons for that, and obviously one of them was, unfortunately for us, was bad weather. Despite being in the Arctic and in the Arctic desert with generally very low annual precipitation, we did almost have the worst weather in current memory from some of the Inuit population up there. So what we got with that was a lot of fog. So fog, fairly benign working on the ground, and as people know, we achieved excelled our sort of drilling targets for the year, but because you can work on the ground, but what it does do is limit aviation activities, and that's where the costs come in. And we had an extra aircraft, we had an extra helicopter to sort of fit into these clear periods where we could, get the logistics going. The other thing is the sea lift was very important. So how we move things around up here is we are on an island with a very, small straits in between, part of the mainland, but most of the base metal mines up here have been on the coast, and that's the reason. That's because you can ship things out. So what we did demonstrate this year, which I think is a massive milestone for this company, is that we've got a ship to come in, resupply fuel, salt, and other things that are fairly cheap but fairly bulky. So you need to get them in. We generally, because it's a fly-in, fly-out operation, similar to many Australian sites, we usually fly our fuel in. So that obviously has a cost. The beauty of it now is, due to the sea lift, all of the fuel, all of the salt, we've got more drilling rods, we've got lumber, we've got a whole bits and pieces up there for next year is already sitting on site and already paid for. So if you take the aircraft and the extra helicopter out, and you've got all the fuel costs, you're saving $4 to $5 million at a minimum up there. So that's done, that's on the ground, hugely successful. But the other thing we did was also send some drilling equipment off site back to the port in Montreal, and also sent some rock. So we had some copper in RC chips, and that essentially for us demonstrated that the full process of the sea lift, and shows that things can be done. And as you can see, it's not the Bering Strait, it's not the world's deadliest catch kind of conditions. It's very benign operating from the seas up there, and you don't need icebreaker ships, etc., etc. So it's very easy to get around with shipping. And look, the best way to move things is via ship, then road, then air. And so we have that advantage up in this part of the world. The other thing I'll point to here is you can see that the scale of these mines, because there has been a lot of talk around the scale of the resource as it sits today, and I'll talk to that and where we think it's going to go from here. But you can see here that these two mines are highly profitable. This was one of Teck Minco's most profitable mines, and you can see the scale of that mine life. These are underground mines. We're looking at open pits. So these are very, very doable projects at this kind of size and tons up in that part of the world. We've touched on none of it. You know, one of the questions for us was the community, which I think is a really good question. So we have Resolute is our closest community, and that's not a that hasn't always been there. So a lot of people will move from Quebec and moved up into that part of the world. So that is our community. We use a lot of the local community on our project. Probably at 20 to 30% of our work staff is a community. We had the Honourable David Agigok, he's the Minister for Finance and Infrastructure and Development at site this year. He was very pleased with what he saw. He was very comfortable that the Resolute Bay community is well represented at our project, and that they have the experience in their team to be able to make calls on future development for Storm Copper. So we're very proactive in that regard. We've had some very good relationships, and our partners, Aston Bay, I mean, they've been up in this part of the world for the last 10 years. So we have some very long, good standing relationships with the community and the local government. One thing that's important just to touch on here as well is that Canada's not, you can't brush all of Canada with the same permitting brush, if you will. And certainly what we're seeing is that even with some long life development projects like the Mary River Iron Ore Mine expansion, which uses 84 ships, so they get 84 ships per annum to move their concentrate, we would probably require 4 or 5. So you can see a difference in scale here. Even with those projects getting permitted, it's an average on only 4 years to get these things across the line. Certainly with a much more lighter, lower impact, I guess higher ESG credentialed project, you can imagine that you know, fitting into the current kind of time frame which they propose, which is that 2 to 3 years on the websites. Now, Storm. So how we get to where we are? So look, we have delivered a slight increase, and I'll talk to that. But also, you know, the real thing about Storm is the confidence factor here. And again, I think it's worth spending some time on sort of expectations around the original resource. How did we get to this point, and also what the future looks like? So we have added Thunder and Lightning Ridge into the fray. So I think what we see in the southern part of the tenement block is these generally be those more structurally controlled parts with higher grades and massive copper sulfides. But maybe because they're not the big SED hosted things, they're sort of a product of the SED hosted big copper things, flatline things that they probably in that limited scale. So maybe in the 1 to 5 million ton range. Absolutely, there could be bigger, and you know, readers might appreciate that we do have a very large anomaly below Cirrus. And then Cyclone as well has expanded, and you know, there's some clear things here that say there's going to grow. We now a bit of the timeline on the drilling as well. So the first hole we drilled was up here. So the first thing in our mind this year was, well, how big can this get, and how quick can we get to where it is? And look, a lot of people have asked. We have this sort of mythical 400,000 tons of copper being a target, and you know, certainly. You know, when asked what can this Storm project provide over time, and that is absolutely in the wheelhouse. In fact, you know, you look at SED hosted copper deposits globally, camps, call this a camp, we have sort of 6 individual deposits, but as a camp, you know, the general average is in that 50 to 100 million ton range. So we're well below that, and we've only explored a very small part of this. So certainly that you know, that is a target, and I expect in the next couple of years to be able to, you know, provide that. The other thing, obviously, that sort of put that 400,000 ton target in people's minds is it was in the Taurus royalty. So that was obviously a milestone, and it obviously opens potential funding for us as well. So that's I guess where this magical 400,000 tons come from. But look, there's some questions around the royalty timing and things like that, and that is a milestone. But you know, there's two things here: is as we develop the other thing to point out as part of the royalty funding, what the other milestone is for about $5 or $6 million is the permitting documentation. So there's two clear milestones. One is the permitting. One is the 400,000 tonnes. Now, the 400,000 tonnes will, I think, like I said, strongly believe we'll get there at some point in the next couple of years. Maybe next year, maybe the year after, who knows? Again, this is arm waving and based on what these deposits can do globally. But you do need time to drill these things out. But the other thing is, if while you do that, you potentially lose focus on the other thing, which is providing an economic study. And so the only way you can't, even if you had 400,000 tonnes of mostly inferred resources, you can't wrap a very robust economic assessment around that. And the problem with that is that you essentially don't have your robust economics. You can't produce a high level study like a PA or PFS, and therefore that can't be permitted. So that means you essentially, if you don't do that, you essentially kick that can down the road. Now, there's a lot of people in the stock for the DSO and the mining potential of Storm, and we personally thought it's fairly unacceptable to not be able to produce an economic study on the back of this and then push this down the road another 12 months. And so therefore there was a lot of, obviously this drilling season, was a lot of focus on increasing the confidence in the resource. So that's what happened. And that I think is a fantastic outcome for the company. And what it does is puts a lot of that, the higher quality mineralization into this open pit opportunity, which is, really from a reporting standard, the inferred, what we've shown is that the cyclone is certainly sticking together very well, as are the other deposits. So that should come as no surprise given what we know about said hosted copper deposits. But you can see here that over 60% in the indicator category. And what this gives us is that permitting pathway. And look, yes, 400,000 tonnes right now, and that royalty milestone would have been fantastic right now, but also let's not think too longer term. In the next couple of months, hopefully we can achieve that other milestone. Now, the risk of only going down the growth pathway and trying to hit that 400,000 tonne range is that you fall short and you get 350 or whatever that number may be, but it's not 400, and then you've also not achieving that other milestone. Now, look, these are, I won't say they are distractions. They're certainly really good ways to get that non-dilutive capital, but certainly, we have to do what we think is best for the company and best for the Storm project moving forwards, because this is a big project. It's going to take time to define. We have 100 kilometers of belt, which I'll talk to in a second, and I'm probably jumping the gun a bit, but these things usually take time to evolve. And, certainly, I can see what I believe would be the best for our shareholders and for the company is getting to that, getting these operations up and running, and then, being able to fund the next 10, 15 years, exploring, expanding this further and making this a truly world-class asset. So look, and how will it grow in the short term? And I may be going a little bit longer time, but I think it's all worthwhile having a discussion around. I mean, this is the shape of cyclone is very clearly sharp, cut off, and terminates in a fault. You can't see this in 3D, but this little panel here is set down another 50 meters. So what that tells you, if everyone see those sort of psychoanalysis butterfly kind of pictures, what do you see in this picture? Well, what you don't see here is what is probably the other half of this thing. And so where's the immediate, where would you go if I had one drill hole to drill and they said that's it, and that the future of the project rests on that? Well, there's two things: the hole that we haven't finished, which is hole 3 this year, because we have a fantastic, quite strong EM anomaly in this fault, and we have a big flat EM anomaly associated with that. But the other thing is finding the other half of cyclone, because while it's probably down a lot and a couple hundred meters, certainly there's parts of cyclone that we can easily mine underground. We hit 20 meters, 8% copper, that'll easily come out of the ground in an underground mine. So there's another half of that, if not more, down there. We know these other near surface deposits will evolve, and there were some questions around Squall, Hailstone, and other parts of where do you think the tons will come? And Look, these, like I said, this zone is very, very, the southern part is very interesting from you get all these individual deposits. You can see here that there's all these faults that come down through this, and there's this big structural control on these things. Hailstone had these 30% coppers and things sitting along this fault. So there's every chance that there's more of this mineralization in these faults. And similar to Squall, the very last meter of the drill hole hit 2.5% copper. We drilled to the west, got kind of weak copper, but it suggested it also may be related to these north-south faults. So very interesting. The gap, obviously, you've got some very good mineralization. Cirrus, we know there's a large anomaly below here as well. So there is more potential here, but I mean, these big flat ones are where you'll incrementally, not incrementally, sort of more exponentially increase the tonnage and a lot quicker. So these are all targets for the future, and and there was another question around how does the geophysics relate to these things. So as we've tested targets along the way, as these things evolved, we're very clearly show that now we thought it was sort of the 1 to 3% range where the EM's picking it up. It's probably more in the 2 to 5% range that the EM's picked up. I mean, this gap was an EM anomaly, and you can see it's at plus 5%. The parts of cyclone that have actually come up on the EM are in that sort of 3 to 5% range as well. So while that's good and it allows us to target these things fairly efficiently, the high grade portions, it does nothing if your average grade is 1.2% copper. And look, we strongly believe, and these things are usually where you get these smaller portions of remobilized sulfides, but then you do get these big flat, more linear ore bodies and stratiform ore bodies. And that's really where this thing will move it to the next level in terms of tons. And so how do we image that? Well, we're going to look at a whole bunch of things, obviously next year, like MT, some other, geophysical methods to improve our targeting in that sense. But at the end of the day, it could be as simple as, right, that's got a footprint. If it sits there, you just need a bunch of holes through here to actually dumb it down and hit them. Because the thing is, because they're very laterally extensive, you should be able to get a sniff of one. And certainly we believe that, that is cyclone down here. We've hit some good parts of that, and that's got over 3% copper in it. So very exciting. Lots of potential next year. Look, this thing's going to grow organically year on, year out, and that's the key. And look, one question around, I'll talk to that in a second, but I want to talk about the DSO and the potential operation. But there is, a lot of analogues in history in this Western Australian mining space about making the decision to mine on what could be a modest resource to start with, but then those things growing over time. The classic examples of Western areas with this, having the 10, 20,000 tons of nickel as a starting point. Jubilee's the other one, had Cosmos, which was 10,000 nickel tons to start with. Decision to mine. Both of these assets ended up being multi-billion-dollar acquisitions, and they grew organically by putting that money in the ground over time. And that's where I strongly believe Storm could be well positioned. Just again highlighting this model for cyclone at depth and what we see, and it's very clear in the geology that this has been stepped down a couple of 100 meters, and that we have really the other half of cyclone probably appearing down here. So that's the immediate resource growth. This is the stacked system. This is a very big system. It can't be expanded overnight. It will take some time. And the other part of the equation is, speaking of time, is that the rest of the belt. So we do have 100 kilometers. And look, and partly this year, there was a lot of balls in the air. And I think it was essential to do that. We have people that are in for the resource growth. There's investors in for the DSO potential. There's investors in for just solely the regional potential as well. So we did try and balance that. The weather didn't help us get the regional, an extensive program in the region done, but we did manage to do enough that gave us a lot of encouragement that, yep, this is absolutely alive. These are future potential resource growth areas, and they require further work. So that's good. We also expanded it out to Seabreeze on the coast here. So no surprise, the geology heads out there, and we've got copper sticking underground up that way as well. So it's truly now 110 kilometers of strike. That's perspective. But again, that's a big scale. These things will take time to evolve. So do we, park the DSO, focus on just regional exploration? That's something that BHP or the bigger companies would do if they had this project. But as the company as we stand, is it more prudent to focus on getting this mine up and running if, provide the economic studies and et cetera, say we should, and then using the organic growth model, or do a bit of both. And that's where we're sort of deciding at the moment. And with the which brings me to the study work and what we're doing. So while all this has been going in terms of the on-ground work and the resources, well, we've had resources focused on getting the economic model and the mining models, et cetera, that up and running. So that had to wait till the updated resource. Now we have that. This week, obviously, new mine plans being developed and optimized because, this will all feed into the studies that are going on in the background. So just a reminder, so look, and some of that, like I said, the resource work was a little bit delayed. We did have extra work come in, and so we've had the metallurgical work reviewed by the Saskatchewan Research Council. We use Steiner ore sorters. They're looking at a whole bunch of other, technologies and sensors and seeing if we, how this process could be optimized further. And the short answer is that absolutely this can be optimized further with further work. And what that looks like is probably a more simpler system. There's some questions around the DSO and how fine can you go and how lower grade and things like that. And so what this will show is that we can go at a smaller size, potentially down to 4 millimeters. What that does is it has potential to actually reduce or actually remove the jigs part of the circuit and just focus on the ore sorting. And so that would be, look, this, like I said, we've put some, rough, we know how much these things cost. So we know a rough value of the current PFD as it stands, but obviously removing anything from that is going to make it cheaper and cheaper. So there's a lot of optimization to go. This thing can handle scale as well. So if we were to look, as it stands, like it's probably fair to say, if I just go back quickly, I think it's important to reflect on just what a mining scenario might look like here. And certainly cyclone has to be part of it and will be, given the indicated. This forms a very flat lying ore body that once you expose a surface, you can mine through it very consistently and get that very consistent feed. This thing is already in the indicated portion, almost 1.3% copper. So the grade naturally comes up. You can see, Chinook, here, this indicated part's actually almost 2% copper. So fortuitously for us, and the drilling showed very early on, is that when we drilled down dip of Chinook, there was some of the lower grades were in that. So they might not actually enter the mine plan at all. So I'd imagine that this material that sticks out of the ground, very low strip ratio, much higher grade, is going to be where the mine starts. And certainly then Thunder represents an opportunity because it has these kind of grades as well in the guts of it. And then we could step into Cyclone. So to me, intuitively, that sounds like what would be a good mining scenario is those three deposits to start with. And then what that gives us is much higher grades than what we see here. With the higher grades, you get better efficiencies with the ore sorters and you get actually higher DSO grades. So all of this work's been incorporated. Like I said, that MET review's now been included. All those assumptions are going into these economic models that have been done in the background. So we've got very good support on that. We use Benny Sung, ex-Glencore metal trader. So he's providing a lot of advice for us in the copper space. We had some questions around the copper market. All I know is that certainly North American, there's a huge demand. A lot of the, particularly the Horn smelters, got a lot of South American copper in it. So any local production certainly bumps that. And so things travel. How do they get it out? Red Dog, some of the Red Dog mineralization, again, managed by Glencore, it goes down to Townsville, out of all places. So all the way from far northern Alaska on a ship down to Townsville. Similarly, Voisey Bay that goes down to parts of Canada and the Horn Smelter as well. So very well trodden shipping routes and very profitable mines, even moving shipments only 3 to 4 months of the year. So we'd follow very similar. It's likely we'd go straight to the Port of Montreal and then onwards from there. So everything will get containerized. So all the DSO will get likely put straight into containers and then sent off to market that way. So that's all of this is coming ahead. But what it does is really, this is all required as a roadmap to the permitting. So that's our aim. That's our focus, is to put the numbers around this, let the market know what this thing looks like, and they'll also form the basis for our plans, obviously during the year. So look, that just summarising that's a quick summary of what we're doing. Obviously, we think we've significantly de-risked the resource, and particularly through the higher quality parts of the ore bodies at the moment. This is not done by any means. Yes, the 230,000 tonnes of probably fall short of a lot of expectations, but some of that, admittedly, is us managing expectations as well. And as these things evolve along the way, it's very, and it evolves quickly, it's very hard to sort of get a sense for what these things are going to look like. And obviously, if you say, oh, no, we're not going to get there this year, but look, we're actually focusing on the infill stuff, then that obviously people might think, well, that's, try harder to expand it. And look, we did, like I said, some of the first drilling we did, we stepped way outside of Cyclone to have a sniff way out. Took a bit of a risk and sort of hoped that it would all come out. But look, this will grow, and as we know, that like this thing will grow over time. Time is needed. We could optimize our exploration programs going forward to accelerate that. Now that we have this nice indicated and de-risked resource, we could actually say, right, let's try and hit that 400,000 next year. What do we need to do that? First thing off my mind says Cyclone Deeps is going to add significant tonnes very quickly if that ends up fleshing out. But also the belt scale, how much time and effort do we put into that this year? And, what does that look like? Because it's all going to be around cost, obviously, and costs are very, into next year. What we do know is that all the fuel and salt, like I said, is paid for. So that's going to save a bucket of money and logistics, and it's going to be much safer operation because all the fuel's already on site. So we less reliance on aviation. So that's a massive win. It's caused us some pain in the short term, obviously bringing that forwards, but I think, it's going to give us massive operational benefits going into next year. And then project development side, like what does that look like? Like I said, we thought this is too good an opportunity to kick down the road another 12 months. And because again, if we fall short of that 400,000 as a potential funding source, because the other thing that these studies unlock is, yes, it unlocks another, it's not like a game where we unlock sort of levels, but certainly provides some non-dilutive funding. Having that level of study also opens the doors to a lot of other financial and funding options, like offtake as one example, but not all, and many others. So it's important to be able to put numbers, mine life, expected production around this project. And, I think that should be a focus for our company in the short term. And that's what we're driving toward. That's what we're doing. These studies are very, very advanced. Very little cost to move these forward. Most of that work was done during the year, including all the environmental work, all the community work, and obviously the design and engineering work's basically done. So look, when we think if we can provide this information, let's not lose sight of, let's not put the current resource is not finite in any means. And I think we've demonstrated that. This will grow over time. We have a, first mover, world-class land holding. As you've seen, there's a lot of other Australian companies trying to get up into this part of the world now. Copper and silver as well. The Storm's got it sticking out of the ground. We've now got very, very robust resources that forms a resource base that people cannot take away from us. There's no arm waving. It's locked in. We've got clear new discoveries around that, and we have a belt that's, like I said, all exposed. The other parts of the Canada are much more difficult to work. They've got lakes, they've got trees, they've got animals, and they've got people. Storm has none of these, and that's one of the advantages. Even though it's all up in that Nunavut part, it is a lot more difficult to work south of those island chains up there. And obviously, they're not close to the coast. So they can only get an ice road in every once a year, potentially, but there's a significant cost associated with that. So look, I think we're sitting pretty in terms of you want to be on the coast, you want to be able to move things to market in ships. And that's where I think we're really well positioned. So hopefully these are all catalysts for the company moving forwards. We're very excited. I think, you look at, again, these companies that made commitments to developing in the short term and then grew those things. I think we don't have to be a BHP size asset before we make that decision, that's for sure. Now, quickly onto West Desert, only because there was a couple of questions on it. This is absolutely in the wheelhouse for the current thematics around the Trump administration and just the China's bans and all that thing. This is only explored 10%. This is a key asset for us. This is essentially what we form the company around. And obviously Storm's taken precedence because it's gone next level very quickly, but there's massive value to be added here. This costs us nothing. There's very, very low holding costs. We own it 100%, including the land. And there's a lot of interest from the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, state departments, et cetera, about indium. And look, as we know, you do the numbers, the value is in the zinc and the silver, but also what could happen, how this could expand in terms of the copper here, which is very little, poorly understood. But the indium could be the catalyst to get the funding to move this forward. So that's what we're looking at. Do we upgrade the current study, which is the PEA level study, NI 43-1? Do we make that JORC? Would that help? And do we do some other de-risking activities? So look, we wouldn't move this forward with the current, we do only have a limited amount of funds. Do we put some of the stall money into this? I think that it'd be premature, but we should look at other funding options, and that's exactly what we're doing. So look, you said some other Australian companies have had some grants recently. There's Element 25 on the manganese front to develop theirs. They've actually had some really good things go their way in terms of funding. So it is out there, and we've been working very hard with some government officials on moving that forward.
So with 61% of the copper now classified as indicator resources, does this updated MRE allow the pre-feasibility study to progress, and what is the indicative timing?
Absolutely, it does. And that's, like, I think I may have touched on it, that's a key part to it, because you can't, there's limits to how much inferred resources you can wrap around a robust economic study. Mm-hmm. But you can take some. And so that's the other thing, is it's not just restricted to indicator resources. So it depends the level of study, but you can take up to 30% of the inferred into any mine plan. And it depends where it is. And one thing I didn't touch on as well is that why we can say that there's going to be growth here, because a lot of drill holes have copper in them that were beyond that inferred resource search ellipse. And so we know that things will expand. And so for us, it may be just simply drilling a hole between those two holes, and that'll bring it into the inferred category. So there's a lot of tons sitting out in those other drill holes, which we just couldn't put. It's a fairly conservative resource because we put some fairly conservative economic numbers around it. And so it tends to kind of constrain it. But that's part of the Canadian way of doing things. And that's actually going to fall into the JORC in the future. So we'll see some changes to that. So yeah, look, that's another reason why we think we can certainly add to the inferred. But like I said, all the beauty of our indicator as well, it's all in essentially one blob. And so technical term, one blob, which means you could easily wrap pits around these things. And it's not all broken up, and that shows the consistency of the mineralization.
Going back to the pre-feasibility study, David's asked if you could outline who's leading each aspect.
Absolutely. So we have Rocky Prey, our VP Ops. He's a mine builder from living in Nevada, and he's been part of some big mine development. So he's been an employee from the start. He's always in the background, so he's not, people don't get to meet Rocky very often, but he's been the driver behind this, working with Jim Moore as well, a mining engineer in Western Australia, open pit specialist. So those two have been working together in the background. But in terms of consultancies, we'll obviously use Apex Geoscience. They've been working with them for the last 3 years. They're fantastic, well spread across the geological disciplines. We have Asenco in Canada, working on the ESG side of things. So they've been really putting our environmental studies together, giving us recommendations, talking about the community engagement plans, etc. And then we're working with Sacredati Engineering in Canada as well. They've been doing the essentially the development design, airstrips, plant, even doing the fine process design plans, etc. That essentially be the sign off on the engineering side of things.
Okay. I can see Rocky's actually on the call, so I could probably unmute him and ask him, but how is it progressing, and can you give any indication of indicative timing for investors? Is it sort of H1 next year, or?
No, look, we have already, and we'd like to see Q1 next year. Absolutely, I think it's important. There's very advanced, like I said, a lot of the work's been done. But look, we're also going to be conservative with it, like the copper price. So there's some questions around copper price. I'd have to say that everybody's crystal ball doesn't work at this point in time, but certainly we'll pick some conservative numbers and probably go with something like spot. But we are talking to metal trader advisors and things. We'll look at a whole range of other inputs on that. But look, I think copper's going to be strong. It has been. Who knows? But yeah, it's certainly, I'm happy that we're in copper and not something a bit more volatile, that's for sure. So
yes. And on the there's a question from Daniel on the royalty and funding. So I'll just read it out. With regard to the Taurus funding milestones, can you please clarify the resource classifications required to trigger the US 4 million tranche payment? Must the 400,000 tonnes of copper be measured/indicated only, or can inferred be included? If a mix is allowed, what proportion of weighting applies to each category?
No limit. Yeah, just not exploration classification, which is JORC, because we'd be there tomorrow. I think because exploration, you have to put a range in. It obviously the minimum would be 230,000 tonnes, and the maximum is based on resource range analysis and all that sort of stuff. So it has to be inferred or indicated, but it doesn't really matter.
Moving on to exploration potential and the 2025 drilling program, Sam and others have asked about, well, they've mentioned that you've only sort of explored 5% of the 100-kilometre copper-bearing horizon. Would like to know, what is your plan to expand exploration across the horizon, and how you're prioritising new targets, as well as the high-grade discovery drilling are you planning to do at these targets in 2025?
The immediate, target for us is that tornado blizzard, which is relatively close to storm. But if we can sort of demonstrate that there's another storm sort of just down the road, that gives people a sense of scale and that ability to grow very quickly. And look, in places like Tempest, yes, we confirm there's copper and zinc down there, but it is a long way away from storm. And so, these things will be ticked off over time. But again, it depends on, what we want to do. Do we expand the resource in the immediate storm area, or do we have enough now to start tomorrow and then let that evolve over time and focus on finding another area? So we don't have that question as it stands just prior to Christmas. But look, we are, like I said, the economic studies we're doing in the background will obviously be the driver for, which way we go. Yes. But look, I think next year there can definitely be a bit of both. I think because we like I mentioned, we do have investors that are with totally different aims and and thoughts on where the company should go, whether it's actually down the development pathway or park that and just expand a thing. So we are listening, and we are open to seeing how the tea leaves fall.
Yes. And You did touch on this in your presentation, but with the geophysical surveys that you've been using, the fixed and loop and moving loop electromagnetics, John has asked, when using these methods, how have they been correlating directly to your actual drill results?
Like I said, it clearly looks now like the EM's picking out the higher grade, that 3 to 5% plus, which has been fantastic in helping us find these sort of more structurally hosted deposits in the guts of cyclone.
Yeah.
We've actually used that and said, look, well, what does it look like if you look deeper? We did do a lot of deep EM, and quite quickly, I mean, it sounds funny being a conductor, but copper sulfides aren't the best conductors, which sounds kind of counterintuitive with the way copper is used, but because they don't always link up, so you need things to be I guess physically joined to each other to make like a big sheet of tin foil to have the best electromagnetic response. And so the lower you come down, it starts to get thin and wispy, and you don't get those effects. So it is good. It's not the only thing. It hasn't probably defined some of the bigger tonnage, lower grade deposits, and so we are looking at what we do there, and AMTs and some of the other mobile MT things that other people are using up in that part of the world. Aston Bay is using it up at their project. You see Whitecliff Minerals is using that thing as well. Let's wait to see maybe what their drilling results tell us about how effective that system is, but use them as a guide. But certainly we're looking at everything and anything to be able to give us that leg up and to expedite discovery, that's for sure.
Perfect. And I've got a question on the Seal Zinc Resource. Is there any work planned at Seal, such as additional drilling or metallurgical testing for ore sorter recovery performance?
I think that second point is really important. I think any drilling we do up there takes it away from somewhere else in the copper space, and so it'll be a balance between what we focus on. But certainly, as we know, like the DSO really works from a copper's point of view. What does it look like for the zinc mineralization? I think that's a fantastic argument to say that we should, get some more material in there, at least 1 or 2 drill holes, and do the same with that, because that could be an easy win. And so I think there needs to be work in that space, absolutely.
And another one on the ore sorter while we're at it. Could the ore sorter treat lower cut-off material to potentially grow the storm resource?
Yep, there's gains to be made in efficiency and optimizing the process further for sure. And that's where we actually did some of those holes that you see in the photos I showed on the cover page. They're all being used for further work in the first half of next year. So which will lead to the next round of studies beyond this first one. So you can never have enough information. You can never, hang your hat on something. You always have to try to be better, reduce costs, and that's what we're going to do.
Roger's asked a question on sort of stakeholder community engagement. I know that you touched on this in the presentation, but I'll ask it. How is American West working with local communities and stakeholders in Nunavut to ensure sort of long-term project success and getting the mine developed? And
well, we use Resolute as essentially a hub of ours. We use a lot of the local community to help us out on the logistics side. Aziz Karaj is the mayor of Resolute. He helps us out with charter flights and accommodation, and he runs a hotel there. And that relationship has been in place for the last 5 to 10 years, and so we employ a lot of the locals, in the camp and on the drill rigs and anywhere that they can help out. So we have a really good local interest in the project. There's not Resolute isn't there's not a lot going on up there in terms of employment outside of the mining industry, and it provides a fantastic base. And so there is a lot of proactive and positive sentiment around mining up there, because a lot of these people worked at the Polaris and Nanacivic mines, and when those things shut down, they're working at the supermarket or doing other bits and pieces. But there's not a lot, like I said, outside. But mining is seen as a very positive up in that part of the world if you do it right, obviously.
Yeah. I just want to jump back to the royalty funding again, because there's a question that's come through which I think might be relevant. Does the company expect the study to be released in Q1? Does that trigger payment of US 3.5 million?
As a royalty currently stands, it actually doesn't specify a level of economic study. So it can be scoping, PEA, PFS, whatever. The trigger is submitting the permitting documentation.
Right.
So on that point, you've made a decision that you want to get this thing up and running.
Yep.
So that a PEA level study is perfectly, that's the minimum you need to do that as far as the Nunavut government goes. And so, yeah, so that's absolutely the goal. And there's no, once that gets submitted, then that triggers I guess the timeline of permitting as far as the government's concerned. So look, I think, a lot of the information we have, we're much higher confidence in scoping level and PEA. So certainly the metallurgy, there's a bit of work to do, but certainly at that level, the resource is absolutely at that level. We're doing geotech at the moment as well. We've got a geotech expert looking at some of the things that will be, obviously, can be improved once we get the final pit shells, etc. We'll need to do some more drilling next year, but certainly for PEA, etc., that's perfectly acceptable. So a lot of the assumptions we're getting, because we're only, it's a very specific production profile and process, that there isn't a lot of options. Like there's one. So, our assumptions are very, very high confidence. And so that hopefully puts a fair bit of weight behind any permitting application, because, it's, we've given them all the data they need to make a decision, rather than just put wishy-washy things in.
Well, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And on the West Desert resource, Craig has asked, as West Desert contains the only JORC-compliant indium resource in the US, how do you see the company positioning the asset to support domestic supply chains, particularly in light of, the US government focus on onshoring critical minerals, as you mentioned in the presentation?
Yeah, moving it forwards and putting it under the noses and in the, I guess, line of sight of the government is important, and we've done that. So Rocky and John have been in Washington last year and had a couple of meetings with key government people that can actually help move this thing forward. And look, a lot of them, to be honest, indium is one of those metals that even they don't understand much about the market, etc., because it's a fairly opaque market, given Glencore controls a lot of it with the as a byproduct of the zinc production. So, and suddenly people are like, holy crap, like the West Desert area that part of Utah is fascinating from a geological sense and also a metal sense, because you have one of the world's only beryllium mines, in the range next door. So the Utah Geological Survey is very, understanding that they have all these unique deposits, and so they can see the opportunity here, and that's why you always get the red carpet rolled out in Utah with the government to help move these things forward. It's been very, very positive, and look, Utah is now classified #1 in the world. In terms of mining jurisdictions.
And some investors have expressed concern around the recent share price movements. Can you provide any insight on what might be driving this?
No, I think, well, if you look at year on year out, I guess the immediate thing is once we stop drilling, we tend to get sold off. And I think it's an unrealistic and not unfair is not the word, but what junior mining company drills 24 months of the year anyway? So you need time to reflect on your results, and I think that's an unfair sort of belt down of the stock in some regards. So that's one option potentially. There's the other thing is we did spend more money this year, and people probably think that we're due for a raise or whatever, and hence I think there's a lot of questions around the royalty funding, not as that is one potential source of future funding, and so that's very forefront in people's minds, right? So that's why we obviously have been working to these things, and like I said, we did spend more money than last year, and we're looking at obviously ways to improve that for next year. Obviously, weather is one thing we have absolutely no control. You know, if we had to stop the program, you know, back in August or whatever, then we would have been 2 months out of when those options were set to expire. You know, that is unacceptable from investors' point of view, particularly people that hold those options. So that would have, you know, we brought the C-lift forward. The delay in the royalty funding from that initial tranche really was negative from exactly that, because things like C-lift, you have to book a year in almost, we had to book that in May. So we needed clarity around that. Yep, we got that first tranche of royalty. That allows us to save on the year coming. But then when we don't get that money for another 6 months, then that's obviously puts us under pressure to, we've already got the ship on, the ship's already sailing away and with all the supplies. So that certainly put us in a bad position. And so, as did the weather. So that's why we've got this extra funding. But look, there's other things as well. And look, and with that comes, is there a confidence in the team and, the project, and you can't operate up there. It's difficult. One important stat which we determined is that there's a couple of companies that put out their cost per ton of ore of resource that they've added, and I can say that one of them was operating in Canada, and they put out, I think it was $75 a ton of copper that was their cost in the exploration program. Ours, when we worked it out, came out at $62 a ton of copper. So more efficient, and with a potentially more cost-effective way of getting out of the ground and processing it as well. It is expensive to be up there. It did cost us more money, but certainly it's probably not as expensive as people think. And we think we've done some good things to set us up for next year. So maybe those two things, obviously weighing on the stock, and then obviously the market. So, we're not alone in some ways. And so it has been difficult. And, it'd be interesting to know what these kind of assets, and not just restricted to us, but some very good assets that are getting punished would be like in a bull market, where there's money's flowing and, everyone gets FOMO and wants to see these things grow. So, a bit of a Swiss cheese model for us, I think. We're doing things differently. Like, we're actually now, from a more strategic sense, looking at ourselves internally as well. Like, is this the best board going forward? What can we do to save costs in this and this and this? So we're reviewing every part of our business, and including marketing, et cetera, et cetera. So, look, we can do better. We're working on doing that, and should always, we get some fantastic feedback from investors as well, and in a one-on-one sense. So, but open to calls and feedback. And look, I think that's one thing. It probably doesn't show on the outside very much, but we do absolutely listen to our investors and put things in place based on their feedback. So, I think we've got a good relationship with some of them and want that to continue.
Yes. Yeah, always open for constructive feedback. I think that's really important. And it was interesting to note your comments on the general market, because based on the commodity clock, I was reading something earlier that we're at 5, or 6 a.m. almost, which, if that is true, I think it was Line Selection who put it out, then it's going to be very good going forward next year. We're at the bottom.
This is the thing.
Who knows? We can't call it, but
look, no, that's a good point. And I think the company needs to be positioned to take advantage of that. And again, if you've got a big long life project that's going to take 10 years to get into production, or you're going to wait. So just say you wait, we're going to make this thing 500,000 tons of copper before we make the decision to mine, then you potentially then got development time on the back of that. So you're putting yourself out 5 years, 7 years, etc. And so you need to be positioned earlier than that, I think, to take advantage of that. And like I said, there's a lot of very, very successful mid-tier Australian companies that started off as what looked like to be a fairly conservative resource to start with, but they made a decision and it worked out for them. Surely there's some that it didn't work out for, but they tend to be the more finite resources where, if you can see organic growth as part of your future, then it's going to grow. So you should have confidence that, okay, you put out a 5-year, you put out a 10-year mine life, it's going to end up being bigger than that. Like a lot of gold deposits are like that. They start on something and it just eventually grows over time, because it's impossible to drill it all out to start with in the first place.
Yeah, I tend to think that share price can be a misleading metric for the company's progress and the project's progress, as you've outlined. Two more questions. I know that we're running a bit over time. So Kim has asked a question on sort of market dynamics, and given the global demand for copper driven by the energy transition, how do you see Storm positioning itself in the market? What competitive advantages do you see?
I think it has touched on it, speed to market, taking advantage of the cycle, you know, not being too cute or trying to, because again, if you wait, then you risk not achieving your goals anyway, and then falling short. So I'm not saying that we're committed to that now, or I guess the outcomes of any studies will tell us whether that's doable. But that's absolutely should be a focus, is if you have a not a unique product in any way, but if you have a way like Phoenix, the iron ore guys, you know, perfect example of that is small finite resource, so much more limited than what we have.
Yeah. Very
quick way to get it. They went from 3 cents to 40 cents overnight, basically by getting that thing going. But knowing that that's not the end game, then they've went and done other acquisitions and bits and pieces, and look at them today. They're now like got ports and all sorts of stuff going on, like a mini mid-res almost. And so, you know, I think that's, you know, understanding what you have, the opportunity you have, and then, you know, acting on it. And being not being aggressive, just being or silly or misguided, but just being confident that you've done the work to say, yeah, we can move this forward. And so that's really, I mean, the copper's not going anywhere. You know, copper certainly is going to be the key to all of this. All of these technologies rely on copper. So I can't see, other than Escondida and those things bumping up production, and, you know, they're longer term things. And so you always sell copper. And the other thing is, we're not going to be flooding the market with our production. We've got people lining up to be able to buy it. So that's the other key point, is that, you know, the product that we've proposed has got a lot of interest. So that's good.
Dave, was there any final closing comments that you wanted to leave investors with today?
Again, it's been a tough season, and thanks for everyone sticking with us. You know, like I said, we're judged on our share price performance, which is not where it should be. I think. But look, we are where we are. We're digging down. We're cutting costs. We're saving things. Like, I think next year's well set up to move this company forward in a very positive way. And I think, you know, everything coming together. Hopefully, the Swiss cheese works the other way this year. And, you know, we've made a lot of learnings. Appreciate any feedback. And lastly, you know, I hope everyone has a great end of year and Christmas. And I'm sure a lot of people want to see the last couple of years put to bed and better market conditions, and, you know, a fresh start to the year. So look, we, you know, like I said, hopefully can keep investors up to date and move onwards and upwards.
Thank you to everyone who joined today's call. We'll end it there. Thanks again. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.